Bienvenidas y bienvenidos a este webinario organizado conjuntamente por la OIT y la FAO. Antes que todo, quisiera recordarles que el evento será grabado y que contamos con interpretación simultánea en inglés y español. Por favor, elijan el idioma que prefieran haciendo clic en el icono de interpretación en la barra de herramientas, como se le está mostrando en la pantalla. También habrá un espacio en la agenda del evento para preguntas y respuestas, así que les invitamos a que participen en el chat general del evento, escribiendo sus preguntas para los ponentes. El webinar de hoy tiene como objetivo presentarles la publicación Trabajo decente e informalidad en el sector agropecuario en América Latina 2019-2023. La publicación, que ya se encuentra disponible en la web de ambas organizaciones en español y su resumen ejecutivo en español y en inglés. El estudio ofrece un análisis profundo sobre los desafíos y oportunidades para avanzar hacia la formalización del empleo rural en la región. Antes de pasar a la presentación del informe, quisiera empezar cediendo la palabra a Ana Virginia Moreira Gómez, directora regional de la OIT para América Latina y el Caribe. Ana Virginia, tiene la palabra.
Muchas gracias, Marco. Buenos días, muy buenos días a todos y todas. Es un honor darles la bienvenida a este evento de lanzamiento del estudio Trabajo decente e informalidad en el sector agropecuario de América Latina 2019-2023. Deseo expressar um saludo especial a Luiz Beduski, oficial de políticas de FAO, ao ministro de Agricultura e ao subsecretário de Agricultura Familiar e Campesina do Ministério de Agricultura de Equador, senhor Santiago Paz, a la diretora executiva de la Câmara de Comércio de Guatemala, senhora Carla Caballeros, al jefe de la Oficina de Cooperación y Relaciones Internacionales del Ministerio de Trabajo de Colombia, señor Diego Hernán Garzón, al subsecretario general de Convergencia Sindical de Panamá, señor Eduardo Gil, y a todas las personas que nos acompañan de manera virtual. Les agradecemos su presencia para reflexionar juntos sobre um tema crucial para o futuro do trabalho em nossa região. Este encontro se enmarca em uma aliança estratégica entre a OIT e a FAO, que tem mais de 7 décadas de história e que foi renovada em 2024 mediante o arreglo complementário ao Acordo de 1947. Com este instrumento, reafirmamos nosso compromisso conjunto para enfrentar os desafios da pobreza rural, a inseguridade alimentar e a informalidade laboral, promovendo sistemas agroalimentários sostenibles e trabalho decente em las zonas rurales. Hoje, damos um passo mais nessa direção, com a apresentação de um estudo que aporta evidência clave para orientar políticas integradas no setor agropecuário. Este informe se vincula diretamente com a recomendação número 204 da OIT de 2015 sobre a transição da economia informal à economia formal, assim como com a resolução adotada em la Conferência Internacional do Trabalho em 2025, que estabelecem os lineamentos para abordar a informalidade e promover a transição hacia a formalidade em favor do trabalho decente. A recomendação e a resolução nos recuerdan que a informalidade sigue sendo um dos obstáculos estruturales más persistentes para la justicia social y el desarrollo sostenible, y nos instan a actuar con enfoques integrados, adaptados a cada contexto y basados en el diálogo social. Este estudio responde a esse llamado, oferecendo um diagnóstico atualizado e orientações estratégicas para avançar hacia la
Strategic guidance
formalización
to
en uno de los
advance towards a
sectores con mayores
formalization of
tasas
one
de
of the sectors with the
informalidad en la
highest
región,
rates
el
of
agropecuario.
informality in the
¿Por
region,
qué este enfoque
agriculture.
sectorial?
Why
Porque
is
el
this
sector
sectoral focus
agropecuario
so
concentra
important?
cerca del
Because it
80% del
concentrates
empleo informal,
80%
con
of the
brechas profundas
informal
que afectan
employment, with
especialmente a
deep
mujeres,
gaps that particularly
jóvenes y
affect
pueblos
women,
indígenas.
youth, and indigenous
Abordar
people.
esta realidad es
Addressing this
esencial
reality is
para cumplir
essential
los
to
compromisos
fulfilling
asumidos
the
en la
commitments
Declaración de Punta
made
Cana
in the
de
Punta Cana
2025,
Declaration of
que nos convoca a
2025,
promover
which calls
democracia, paz, trabajo decente y diálogo
to
social. Una
promote
estrategia de
democracy,
formalización
peace,
para América
decent
Latina y el
work, and social
Caribe,
dialogue
CELAC
in Latin America and the
2.0,
Caribbean. The formalization
2024-2030,
strategy for
que
LAC 2.0,
plantea un marco
2024-2030
integrado de políticas
proposes an
para la
integrated
formalización en
policy
la
framework
región
to
y unas
formalize
directrices de política para
these
la promoción
aspects
del
in the
trabajo
region. And in the
decente y del
policy
sector
guidelines for promoting
agroalimentario,
decent work in the
adoptados
agri-food sectors,
tripartitamente en
adopted
2023,
tripartitely
establecen
in
principios
2023,
y un
which
marco de
establishes
acción para
principles
garantizar
and a
trabajo
framework
decente como
of
parte de
action to
sistemas
ensure decent
alimentarios
work as
sostenibles.
part of sustainable
Este
food systems.
estudio es, por tanto,
This
un
study,
insumo
therefore,
estratégico para avanzar
is
en
a
estas
strategic
agendas
input
y para fortalecer
to
la
progress
coherencia
on
entre
those
las
agendas
dimensiones
and to
productiva,
strengthen
laboral, social
coherence
y
amongst
ambiental
the
del
productive labor,
desarrollo
social,
rural.
and environmental
Quiero
dimensions of
destacar que este informe
rural
también
development.
sienta las
I would like to
bases para el
underline that this
programa conjunto
report also lays the
Transición a la
groundwork
economía
for
formal
the
en el
joint
sector
program,
agropecuario
Transition to Formal Economy in
de
the
América
Agricultural
Latina y el
Sector of
Caribe
Latin
que
America and the
estamos
Caribbean,
formulando
which we
junto
are
con la FAO.
developing
Este
together with
programa
FAO.
busca
This
acelerar
program
la
aims
formalización del
to
empleo rural
accelerate rural
mediante
employment
soluciones innovadoras,
formalization through
articulando
innovative
políticas
solutions,
productivas, protección
integrating
social y desarrollo de
productive policies,
competencias
social
y
protection,
mecanismos de
skills
diálogo
development,
social.
and social
Será
dialogue
una
mechanisms.
contribución
It will be
concreta
a
a la
concrete
implementación de la
contribution to
estrategia
the
FORLAC
implementation of
2.0
the Four
y
Lakes
a los
Strategy
compromisos de la
2.0
Declaración de
and to the
Punta Cana de la
commitments of
OIT,
the Punta
con
Cana
el
Declaration of
objetivo
the
de que
ILO,
nadie quede
with the goal
atrás en
that
la
no one is left
transformación de
behind
nuestros
in
sistemas
transforming
agroalimentarios.
our agri-food systems.
Agradezco a todas las
I
personas que
thank
han hecho
everyone who
posible
made
este
this study
estudio y
possible
a quienes
and
participan
those
hoy en este
participating
diálogo.
today
Estoy
in this
segura de que
dialogue.
las
I am
reflexiones y
confident that the
propuestas que
reflections and
surjan
proposals
en este
that emerge
webinario
from this
serán
webinar
fundamentales
will
para
be
avanzar
crucial
hacia un futuro con
for
más
moving
trabajo
towards a
decente,
future with
menos
more decent work,
informalidad y
less
mayor justicia
informality,
social
and
en
greater
América
social
latinoamericana.
justice in
Les
Latin
deseo
America
el
and
mayor
rural
éxito
areas.
en esta
I wish
importante
you great
actividad.
success
Muchas
in this
gracias.
important activity. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Ana Virginia. Ahora
Thank
mostraremos un
you
mensaje pregrabado de la señora
very
Reni
much.
Orellana, subdirectora
We will
general y
have
representante
a
regional de la FAO para América
pre-recorded
Latina y el Caribe, que
presentation
lamentablemente
by
no pudo
Mr.
unirse hoy al
Orellana, who is
evento.
not able to participate today.
Excelencias, distinguidas autoridades, representantes de gobiernos, de organizaciones de trabajadores y empleadores. Señora Ana Virginia Moreira, directora regional de la Organización Internacional del Trabajo. Amigas y amigos, reciban un cordial saludo. Para la FAO es un honor participar en la presentación del informe Trabajo decente e informalidad en el sector agropecuario de América Latina 2019-2023. Este documento aporta evidencia sólida, análisis riguroso y un llamado urgente a fortalecer la dignidad laboral en los territorios rurales de nuestra región. El trabajo de millones de mujeres y hombres rurales es esencial para nuestras economías, para la estabilidad de los sistemas agroalimentarios y para la seguridad alimentaria de toda América Latina y el Caribe. Sin embargo, estas contribuciones no siempre se traducen en condiciones laborales justas, seguras y sostenibles. El sector agropecuario es estratégico, representa más del 12% del empleo total y hace de nuestra región la principal exportadora neta de alimentos del mundo. Pero persisten desafíos profundos. La informalidad laboral supera el 80%, afectando ingresos productividad y acceso a la protección social. Este escenario reproduce desigualdades estructurales que condicionan la seguridad alimentaria y las oportunidades de desarrollo rural. Las mujeres rurales enfrentan brechas persistentes debido a la concentración en trabajos no remunerados, estacionales o con limitada autonomía económica. Los jóvenes sufren barreras para insertarse en el mercado laboral por falta de formación pertinente y de empleos de calidad. En paralelo, muchas personas mayores continúan trabajando por necesidad sin pensiones adecuadas. A ello se suman limitaciones históricas, escaso acceso a la tierra, crédito y servicios, bajos niveles educativos, vulnerabilidad climática, degradación ambiental y la persistencia del trabajo infantil en actividades agrícolas. Estos factores se potencian entre sí, profundizando ciclos de pobreza e informalidad. Sin embargo, también observamos avances importantes, acciones anticipatorias frente a desastres rurales, programas de protección social más adaptados al campo, mejoras en registro laboral, fortalecimiento del cooperativismo y un diálogo social cada vez más sólido. Permítanme subrayar 4 elementos claves para avanzar. Primero, la formalización exige articular políticas de agricultura, trabajo, protección social, desarrollo territorial y acción climática, productividad y derechos, que deben avanzar juntos. Segundo, necesitamos más diálogo social en los territorios, con participación efectiva de mujeres, jóvenes y trabajadores informales. Tercero, la formalización debe estar en el centro de una transición climática justa. La adaptación y la mitigación deben generar empleo digno y protegido. Cuarto, la transformación digital es fundamental. La conectividad y la alfabetización digital pueden mejorar la productividad, ampliar la protección social y abrir nuevos mercados. Finalmente, se requieren marcos normativos estables, financiamiento sostenible y políticas de largo plazo que permitan consolidar y escalar experiencias exitosas. Porque asegurar trabajo decente en el sector agropecuario no es solo mejorar condiciones laborales, es fortalecer la resiliencia de nuestros países, la seguridad alimentaria de millones y la capacidad de la región para enfrentar los desafíos globales. La FAO reafirma su compromiso de acompañar este camino con rigor técnico, con cooperación y con determinación. El desarrollo rural no puede esperar, es ahora. Muchas gracias.
Ahora quisiera pasar la palabra a Efraín
I would
Quicaña,
like now
especialista
to
en
pass the
estudio
word
rural de
to
la OIT,
Efrain
América Latina y el Caribe,
Quicaña,
que juntos
specialist
con Luis
of Latin
Bedusky,
America
oficial
and
de políticas
the
de la FAO,
Caribbean, that
nos hablarán
together
de los
with
principales hallazgos
Mr.
de la
Badusky from
publicación.
FAO will
Efraín,
be
el floor es
talking
tuyo. Gracias.
about the publication. The Efrain, you have the floor. Thank you.
Ok. Muchísimas gracias, Marco. ¿Me escuchan?
Thank you very much, Marco.
Para
Can you hear
continuar.
Te
me?
escuchamos.
Just to confirm, yes? Oh, we can hear you.
En primer lugar, quiero
Firstly,
expresar mi
I would
reconocimiento al
like
equipo
to
de OIT
express
y
my
la FAO
recognition
por
to
su
the
valiosa
ILO and FAO
colaboración
team
en
for
la
their
elaboración de este
collaboration
estudio.
in the generation of
Asimismo,
this
agradezco a
study.
todos los
I would also
ponentes y
like
participantes que
to
nos
thank the
acompañan
participants
el
that
día,
are
el
with
día de hoy.
us today.
Como parte del panorama
As
general,
part of the
comienzo
general
relevando
overview,
aspectos claves
I would like to
sobre la
mention key
importancia del
aspects of
sector
the
agropecuario y
significance
sus
of the
desafíos
agricultural area
estructurales,
sector
que se
and its
desarrollan
structural
en el estudio.
challenges,
Mi
which
exposición
were
presentará
analyzed in
básicamente una
this
invitación para que
study.
los
I'd like to
lectores
give you
puedan
some insight
bajar y
so that
revisar este
those of you
documento. En el
are,
informe se
can
reconoce
download this
que
document.
el
The
sector
report
agropecuario es
indicates
vital para el
that the
empleo rural,
agricultural
la
sector
seguridad
is
alimentaria y
fundamental
las exportaciones en la
for
región, ya
exports
que
in Latin
esto ha sido
America.
relevado en
This
las
has
palabras
been
iniciales del
underlined
director
in the opening
regional de la
remarks
FAO y una
of the
directora regional de la OIT.
regional director of
Sin
FAO
embargo,
and the representative
revela
and
una
leader of
paradoja
ILO.
histórica.
But
América
there's a
Latina es una región
structural
líder en
paradox.
exportación de alimentos,
A
pero con
region
una seguridad
is
alimentaria
leader
aún
in
desigual
food
y
exports, but
vulnerable para amplios
still
sectores de la
with an
población.
inequality
when it comes to food security. There are still extensive levels of informality, low income, limited productivity, and a weak social protection and a lack of collective voice. This limit the growth of the sector and the livelihood of people living in rural with rural income. Advancing the formalization are key to a sustainable and inclusive development. How can we improve this decent and sustainable work? It was one of the questions that was set forth when we began analyzing this report. The evolution of 2019-2023, we see the transformation of the agricultural employment. The amount of people that work in this sector was relatively stable, but there was a change. There were more people with salary, salaried people and workers with by themselves, but also there was a reduction in auxiliary family workers. There was throughout the decades, the last decades, there has been a loss of participation in total employment. The 21.4% in 1991 to 12.6% in 2023 is the participation in agriculture and the reduction of its economic participation or share in its contribution in the GDP of the region, which dropped from 9.6 in 1981 to 6.5 in 2023. In the last decades, the agriculture has been affected by adverse factors and structural change, pandemic, the international conflicts, climate vulnerability, etc. However, we have observed that the slight growth was promoted by improvement in the input, but not for efficiency, and also the relative increase of work productivity in certain sectors was encouraged or promoted by technological modernization. And so the lack of innovation, which is the modernization limitations, the lack of innovation and technological adaptation with the institutional presence in rural areas has affected the resilient. The report has structural inequalities, like a high heterogeneous structure. The region has major agro-industrial complexes with a great number of small scale or small size family subsistence groups. There's also a gap in access to earth, to soil, credits, services, and education, and a limited presence of employment market institutions and mechanisms to promote productive development in rural areas. Women have very little access. They are low qualified employment of low productivity or unpaid, and they face in addition risks of being harassed sexually and gender attacks. So within the topics, more than 50% of the agricultural workers do not finish their high school education, which makes it difficult for them to implement and adapt and adopt technological advancements and labor mobility. There are advances in health, but there persists gaps in the agricultural sectors, in addition to seasonality, informality, and irregular income, and systems that are not well adapted. Also, we have children, millions of children working in the countryside, representing a social challenge which is critical to the region, and there is an aging of rural population. And so this study report also sets forth a profound analysis of the main features of informality in the agricultural sector. The agricultural sector concentrates 12.6% of total employment, but it is the highest record of informality, close to 80% of its participants. There, the informality of female worker reaches 86.4% vis-a-vis 78 of men. A higher presence of youth and elderly in the agricultural informal employment, and the auxiliary support is 38.5%. Now, there is a lack of written contracts, which limits rights and formalization. 17 of 18 countries analyzed has significant amounts of informality. There is a seasonality, multiple jobs, and working hours, which represents more than 60% of informal employed women, which work more than or less than 35 hours a week. And we know that more than 50% of those that work in this area have not graduated from high school. The informality rate drops with your educational level, 83.6% with people with up to 6 years of education versus 65.4 for those that have 13 or more years of education. Next, I will pass the word to Luis Bedusky, who is going to tell us a little bit about what we have analyzed and can give us some recommendations for for policy generation. Luis, the floor is yours. Thank you, Efrain. It is a pleasure to be presenting with you here the results of this report that we have shared. It is an additional step, as Virginia says, in a long trajectory, and now we're going deeper into our organizations. I will share now my, so what did we do jointly? In addition to this analysis that is so important, which was presented by Efrain, just to give you an idea, there are already some responses, some interventions in countries that are trying to take on these challenges that have just been described. We can see 35 experiences in Latin America, out of which we have to keep in mind that the majority of them have not explicitly involved the formalization or the improvement of employment or jobs as at the core. So what we did, we intervened the policies for like 2.0 launched by ILO, productive development, employment and competencies, social protection, and employment rights and oversight. What we observed, what was there in the policies of their countries. And it is very clear the challenge that exists to ensure that decent work and formalization is observed from the gender standpoint, and it is very clear and consistent.
Aburri-los mucho, pero la diversidad de experiencias analisadas com os colegas de la FAO e de la OIT, acá veio a Juan Manuel também, a quem saludo e
ILO
agradeço por el esforço.
that I would like to say hi to, and I thank the team of Efrain that allows us to look at the experiences of productive development and formalization of lands, such as the case of Colombia with the policies of the multi-purpose cadastre, the policy for Peru, the rural and land cadastre titling and registration project. For Ecuador, they have the territorial development and sustainable agriculture in Destiny Park, sustainable works and promotion of associativity and value chains for Colombia, Argentina, and Ecuador. And we have identified several things and improvements in the productive
de los registros,
associative,
articulación
and with the goal of
interinstitucional y
articulation
acceso
between
efectivo a terra sobre
institutions,
todo para mujeres e pequenos
specifically
produtores
for
de
women
fontes
and
altos
small
custos e
producers
marcos
with
normativos
high costs and
limitados.
regulation
En el
frameworks.
campo del empleo y desarrollo de
Regarding
competencias,
employment and
miramos con especial
training and
atención
skills, we
el
look
campo de
at
fortalecimiento de competencias con un
the
programa en
strengthening of
Bolivia, de programa de apoyo
skills
directo para
for
criación de iniciativas
Bolivia,
agroalimentarias rurais. No
for different
Peru, o campo de pesca
initiatives.
artesanal. Acá en
In
Chile,
Peru, the
o programa de
artisanal
asociación
fishing
económica
agents. In
Uruguay,
Chile, economic
con los
associativity
tipos de salario
program. For
de
Uruguay,
actividad
the salary
económica. Y en ese
councils
campo,
by economic activity. And in this
esa área de
area,
desarrollo de capacidades
we
para la
see the capacity
empleabilidad y
building for
promoción
employability
de la
and
formalización
promotion
empresarial,
of business
¿no? La
formalization,
capacitación técnica, la creación de empresas
such as technical
associativas.
training and the creation of
Hay mucha
associative
coisa acontecendo
enterprises,
nesse campo,
many
estão melhorando a
things happening in
competitividade e a
this
inclusão, e
area.
que
The
é o desafio
competitiveness and
de
inclusion is
ampliar a
improving.
cobertura,
And there's a
sobretudo em
challenge, which is its
em
expanding coverage in
territórios mais
dispersed
dispersos, né?
territories
Reduzir brechas de
and also
conectividade e
reduce connectivity
vincular a
gaps
formação
and link
técnica
technical
com as
training
demandas
with the real
reais
demands
das
of
cadeias de valor
agricultural value chains.
agropecuárias. No mundo da proteção social, acá
Regarding social protection,
nas experiências analisadas, essa é
some of the
uma região que tem
experiences
muita
we've
experiência,
analyzed, and this is a region that
tanto
has a lot of
na
experience in
Argentina,
this
República
area in
Dominicana,
Argentina,
Equador, Costa
Dominican
Rica,
Republic,
Brasil
Ecuador,
e
Costa Rica,
México.
Brazil,
Há
Mexico.
muitos avanços, não?
There is a
Há
lot of
maior cobertura
progress
hoje,
made,
agora,
a
com
lot of
apoio à
coverage
formalização.
now,
Se
more support to
destaca a gestão
formalization,
de
and we can
organizações
highlight
locais e a
the
adaptação
local
aos contextos
organizations, the
produtivos, pegando o
adaptation to
desafio
productive
de da
context, and we still
sustentabilidade
have challenges
desses
such as
sistemas de proteção social,
sustainability and
inclusão
inclusion of
de
temporary
temporários, de
and
migrantes, que é
migrants,
algo que temos que manter a
which is
atenção
something that we need to pay attention to
nuestro trabajo hacia adelante.
in the
Por
work that we
último,
are
el
doing
campo
ahead.
de los derechos laborales y la
Regarding labor
fiscalización,
rights
¿no?
and
Hay
oversight,
mucha experiencia en el
we
mundo
have a
en
lot of
torno a la
experience
fiscalización,
in
mas
the region
conocemos que el
related
cumprimento
to
de
these
los derechos
oversight,
laborais
compliance,
nos países
monitoring,
como
recognition,
Argentina,
recognition of
Perú,
labor rights in
Chile,
Argentina,
Brasil,
Peru, Chile, and
se puede
Brazil.
verificar
And
avanços,
we
não
can check
melhores,
that there
en el
are
controle
improvements
normativo,
in
regularização de
regulatory
milhares de
control, in
trabalhadores em
regularization
condições
of
de
thousands of
contratos
workers,
ilegais,
and
porém,
also reduction of
contudo,
irregular
temos o
contracts.
desafio de superar a
But we still
limitada
have the
capacidade
challenge of overcoming
institucional
the
para
limited
cobrir os
institutional
territórios
capacity to
dispersos
cover
que
dispersed
caracterizam o mundo
territories,
rural. Também para garantizar a
to
aplicação
ensure the
uniforme de
uniform
sanções e
application of
consolidar marcos
sanctions
normativos
and
que incentivem
consolidate
a
regulatory
formalização.
frameworks
A partir desse
to
trabalho que
encourage
diagnóstico
formalization.
representou Efraim,
From
dessa
this
mirada
work
mais
that Efraim
aprofundada,
presented
tendo
and
essas
that a
experiências,
deep
essas
view with the
intervenções
experiences of all of these
analisadas,
interventions that were
evidentemente
analyzed,
chegaram a conjunto de
they reach
recomendações de política pública que estão
several
plasmadas
recommendations of
nesse
public
importante informe.
policies that are part of
Quais
this
são
report.
essas recomendações?
And what are
E
those
mais que tudo estão
recommendations?
orientadas,
Well,
e aí
mostly these are
esse
focused
vídeo já nos dizia, não?
on, and the video showed
Requerem
it, but
políticas que
this is
combinem
something that require
produtividade,
policies that
formalização,
combine
proteção
productivity,
social,
formalization,
fortalecimento
social
institucional
protection,
e
institutional
sustentabilidade
strengthening, and
ambiental. Essas
environmental
10
sustainability.
recomendações partem por
So from those
implementar estratégias e
recommendations,
políticas
and these recommendations
integrais que
come from to
acelerem a
promote this
transição à formalidade,
transition to formality
por
and
integrar a formalização
that
da unidade econômica e
integrates the
laboral na
formalization of
estratégia
the
de
labor
transição
economic
climática
unit and strategies
justa,
for
por
climate
fortalecer a
transition,
cooperação
and so that
institucional
it
e
can
efetiva,
strengthen
articular
institutional
políticas rurais
networks
efetivas,
to have
passa
some
por
more
consolidar
effective
o diálogo
rural
social
policies and also
tripartito como
consolidating
ferramenta de
tripartite social
legitimidade e
dialogue as a tool for
sustentabilidade,
legitimacy
por
and
garantizar o
sustainability
financiamento
to ensure and
sustenido
sustain,
e
as well as
diversificado
diversifying
para
financing,
a transformação
the
rural,
financing for rural
incorporar,
transformation.
isso é muito importante cada vez
And
mais
this is very
nessa
important,
nova
in,
economia,
even
incorporar
more important
tecnologias
in this new
digitais
economy,
como
which is
eixo da inclusão
incorporating digital
produtiva
technologies
e
as an axis
formalização,
of
por
productive inclusion
combater a
and
desinformação e
formalization, as well as
redesenhar
combating
os incentivos
misinformation
para formalizar-se,
and to redesign
vincular a
incentives to
formação
formalize,
técnica e
linking
profissional com as
technical
demandas
and
do setor,
vocational training with the
garantizar
demands
o
of the sector
acesso às
to
formações
ensure
rurais e
that
uma
rural
proteção
populations
social
have access
adequada e
to
promover
adequate
sistemas de
social
proteção
protection
social mais
and promote
sustentáveis,
social
inclusivos e
protection
eficazes. E,
systems that are more
obviamente,
sustainable, inclusive, and effective,
monitorar e evaluar
and
essa política
systematically
pública no
monitor
setor
and evaluate.
enfoque
All
de
of this
transversalidade,
with
mirando
uh,
para a igualdade de gênero
approach
e para as juventudes
that's cross-cutting, and it's paying attention to gender equality in rural youth. And that is what, colleagues, you will find in our report, that we are very happy that we have launched together by ILO and FAO.
Muchísimas gracias, Luis y
Thank
Efraín.
you so much,
Ahora
Luis and
pasaremos a las
Efraín.
breves
Now
intervenciones
we
por
are
parte de
going
representantes de
to do
gobiernos
some
y
interventions
empleadores en
from
cada uno de
government
los sectores. Y
representatives,
para
employers, and
empezar,
workers.
quisiera ceder la
To
palabra al
begin,
señor
I
Santiago
would like
Páez,
to give the floor to
secretario
Mr.
de
Santiago
Agricultura
Páez,
Familiar y Campesina del
Undersecretary of
Ministerio
Family
de
and
Agricultura del
Farmers
Ecuador.
Agriculture at the
Señor
Ministry
Páez,
of
tiene la
Agriculture of
palabra.
Ecuador. Mr. Páez, you have the
Muchísimas
floor.
gracias. Buenos días
Thank
a
you
todos sus
very much. Good
compañeros.
morning,
Primeras
everybody.
palabras, saludando muy cordialmente a
Thank
todas
you for
las
giving me the floor. I
autoridades
would like to say
presentes
hi to all of the
en nombre del
authorities that
Gobierno
are
Nacional del Ecuador,
connected
liderado
to this
por el
session. On behalf of
presidente
the
Daniel
government of
Noboa.
Ecuador,
Mi
led by
cordial
President
saludo en
Daniel Novarzi,
representación del Ministerio
and
de
my
Agricultura,
greetings
Ganadería
from the
y Pesca.
Ministry of
Quiero
Agriculture
extender este saludo a
and
las y los
Fishing. I would like
representantes del
to say
gobierno,
hi to the
a las
representatives of the
organizaciones de
government,
trabajadores y
to the
empleadores, al
organization of
Accionar de la
workers and
Frontera América
employers
Latina y el
of
Caribe,
ILO for Latin
asimismo
America and the
al
Caribbean,
subdirector general de
and
la
to
FAO
the
y
General
representante
Subdirector
regional para
of
América Latina y el Caribe,
FAO,
René Orellana. Saludo también a los
Mr. René
representantes de la
Orellana.
FAO y de la OIT y a toda la
Greetings to the
operación
Food
que
and
está
Agriculture
trabajando
Organization technical
en esta
teams and
mañana.
everybody
En primer
joining us
lugar,
this
gracias por
morning.
la invitación.
Firstly, I would like to thank for
Este
the
estudio
invitation
conjunto
to talk
elaborado entre
about
la
this
FAO y la
study
OIT
we did together with
determina
FAO and
transición de economía
ILO,
informal
which
en
is
el
called
sector
Transition
agropecuario de
to
América Latina y
Decent
el Caribe. Para
Work
quienes
and
estamos parte de
Informality
la
in the
Confederación de
agricultural sector.
Inserción
For those who are
Económica
part of
Agropecuaria,
this
este tipo de
work
estudios no son solo un
and that are part of
diagnóstico,
this
son una
sector,
hoja de
this type of
ruta
study
para
it's not
orientar
just a diagnosis, but a
los
roadmap to guide
territorios rurales
actions
hacia
in our
estándares
rural
de seguridad y
territories,
condiciones dignas y no
to
solo
improve
económicas.
employability and
10 años
worthy
después de
conditions
la
for
redacción
our
de la
producers.
recomendación
And
número
10 years later,
204
after the
sobre la
recommendation and adoption number
transición de la economía
204
informal
for transition
de
of
la
informal
formal, la OIT nos recuerda
economy
que a
to a
escala
formal
global
economy,
cerca de
at the
6
global
millones de
scale, there were
personas
about
ocupadas
6 to 10
y 8 de
people
cada 10
who
empresas siguen
were
en
occupied, and 8
conflicto.
out of 10 people
Esto
continue in
confirma
informal
que
economies. And
estamos
this
en un desafío
confirms
estructural
that we
para el
have a
trabajo
structural
decente y la justicia
challenge
social,
ahead for the work and
que se
social
expresa
justice
con
that is
especial fuerza en el
expressed
sector agropecuario. La
strongly in the
informalidad
agricultural
rural no es
sector.
solo un
Rural
efecto, es el
informality
rostro de
isn't
la
just a
inseguridad social
statistic,
en el
it's the
campo.
face of social
Detrás de
insecurity
las
in the
cifras
fields.
están
And
las
behind these
fronteras, los
numbers,
jornaleros,
we
los
have the
migrantes que
daily
trabajan en empleados
workers
temporales
that
sin
are
seguridad
subjected
social,
to temporary
las familias
contracts without
campesinas que
social
producen
security, those
alimentos
farmers'
esenciales sin acceso a
families that
crédito,
produce essential
seguros
food
agrarios
without
y
access to
una protección
credit,
mínima frente a los riesgos
agricultural
climáticos.
insurance,
Las y
or
los
any
jóvenes
protection
rurales
in the
que hablan
face
con
of climate
información
change.
muchas veces ven más viable
And
migrar y construir su
it is
proyecto
easier to
en sus propios
migrate than build
territorios.
a project in their own
En el caso de
territory.
Ecuador, la política
In the
pública
case of
estatal para
Ecuador,
el
the public
sector
policy of the
agropecuario,
state for the
implementada en
agricultural
marzo del
sector
plazo 2025-2034,
and for
ha liderado programas de
2025,
siete perspectivas.
2034
Nuestra
under
apuesta
this
no es
ministry
transformar estas realidades, el
seeks
objetivo
to
es
transform this reality,
modernizar
and
el
the goal
sector
is to
agrícola, la
modernize the
formalización y
agricultural
fortalecer la
sector,
seguridad
the fishing
alimentaria,
sector, livestock sector,
incrementar la
and
sostenibilidad
to
frente al
strengthen
cambio climático.
sustainability in the face
Esta
of
política
climate
espera
change.
mejorar la
This
productividad,
policy
los
aims to
ingresos
improve
y sobre
productivity,
todo la
income,
creación de
and
empleo en
mostly
zonas
the
rurales.
creation of jobs
Esta
in
apuesta es
rural areas.
fundamental,
This
generar las
is a
condiciones
key
actuales de acuerdo con encuestas
approach,
nacionales de
improving
empleo,
the
desempleo y
conditions
subempleo del
with
2024.
the
La
information we
pobreza extrema
have of
crece y en el país
2024
alcanza
unemployment and the poverty of income, it
24.2%,
reaches
pero en las zonas
24.2%.
rurales se eleva
But
a
in rural area, it
38.8%,
reaches
más del doble que en el área
38.6%, which is double
urbana,
as
dado que
we have in
únicamente el
urban
7%.
areas, which is
El
around
empleo no
17%.
remunerado asciende a
Non-paid
20% y más del
employment reaches
73% de
20%,
los
and more than
trabajadores.
73% of
Los
the
trabajadores
workers
rurales se encuentran
and
en
rural
situaciones de
workers
informalidad.
are in
Son
informality
datos muy
conditions.
retadores y
This
de mucha
data is
complejidad.
challenging and
Intervenciones
shows the
estructurales
need
para
of
mejorar
intervention that
productividad,
is to be
empleo
structural
digno e inclusión en
for
el campo ecuatoriano. Me
worthy
permito compartirles
employment
tres ideas
in
desde la
this
mirada de Ecuador
sector.
muy
And I'd like
puntuales
to share
que
the
contribuyen a
perspective of
superar los
Ecuador
altos niveles
and
de
other
informalidad en
countries
el campo.
that have high levels
Primero,
of
nuestra
informality
investigación
in
confirma que no hay
the
trabajo
field.
decente sin políticas específicas para el empleo
It
rural.
needs specific
La
policies for rural
informalidad en el agro
employment, and
incluye
informality in the
pobreza
agricultural sector
modelo
causes with
sistemática,
poverty,
brechas de género y falta de
gender gaps, a lack of social protection, which is why we see that it's very clear that this publication is a huge contribution because it provides for information for the region, and we are able to understand the dynamics of informality in the agricultural sector. And it also provides for key contributions for us to address and create policies. Second, the transition to formality requires clear principles in the international framework, and the big challenge is to take, take us there. The resolution of skills of 2025 and the strategy 2.0 provides a common framework, which is a formalization, isn't just for productive units, it's to guarantee right social protections and social dialogue when we create and preserve these decent jobs and we avoid informality of the existing jobs. We appreciate ILO and FAO to contribute on this study, but also on technical tools such as the resources of support towards formalization and decent rural works. These instruments are key to translate the principles into something specific adapted to the reality of our producers. In Ecuador, we are making progress in this direction with policies and programs that are specific and that we want to continue strengthening with the support and contribution of international support and contribution. We have a national plan of development. Ecuador will not stop on 2025 to 2029. We want to prioritize social equality and sustainable development, and we acknowledge the agricultural sector as a generator of jobs. And I mention this because the government of Ecuador has specific active plans to promote decent employment in the agricultural works and with rurality, with sustainability, with support to family agriculture and rural youth. Regarding rural youth, we can highlight the Agro Youth program implemented on 2024 with the technical assistance of FAO, and the goal is to promote opportunities of decent work for the youth operating nationally in the production sector through the strengthening of these value chains, promoting entrepreneurships, contributing to the reduction of losses and the waste of food by developing agro gastronomical experiences in this productive chain. We believe that all of this contributes to the resiliency of this agro-food and agricultural sector. In addition, we have the Agro Youth Committee that has the aim to promote employment, participation, and governance for rural youth in the agricultural sector. This committee coordinates policies, programs, and benefits to strengthen their skills, to facilitate the access to financing linked to the youth, and to give them access to the markets, and to support their collective organizations with an inclusive and gender approach. All of these programs align with the view that we have nationally show that this circular economy in terms of policy, agricultural sector, employment, sustainability, it reminds us that we still have some big challenges ahead, such as improving the works in the agricultural sector to strengthen this dialogue between organizations of workers and rural employees, and also with the youth working in the farms. We thank the study and the space provided to us today to share all of this information. We believe it is very important to exchange these experiences between countries that have also worked on this area and towards formality. To share, it is key for economic growth and social growth of our countries. And I would like to conclude with just one last idea, because for our countries, the formalization of the agricultural sector shouldn't be a utopia and a real purpose for those producing the food that reaches our cities, and so that they can do this with rights, protections, and perspectives of growth. And we, from Ecuador, we will continue working on that, moving towards that goal, specifically with the work and support of FAO and ILO to create decent work that contributes to sustain the work in rural areas in our countries. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your intervention. Now I would like to invite Mr. Diego Hernan Garzón, Head of the Office of Cooperation and International Relations at the Colombian Ministry of Labor. Mr. Garzón, you have the floor.
saludo especial a la señora Ana
Thank you, Marco. I
Virginia
would like to
Moreira,
say hello
directora
to
regional
Ms. Ana
de
Virginia
Latin America del
Moreira,
Caribe,
Director of ILO for
a
Latin America and
René
the
Orellana,
Caribbean,
director regional
to
de la
Rene
FAO,
Orellana, the Regional Director of FAO, Subdirector Rene Efraín, Mr. Lucy, and
a
all
los
of the FAO
distinguidos y
team,
distinguidas panelistas, a todas
to
las
all of the
personas que nos
panelists,
acompañan de manera
guests,
virtual.
everybody joining us
Reciban un
virtually.
cordial saludo en nombre del señor
Greetings
presidente de la
from the
República de Colombia,
President
doctor
of
Gustavo
the
Petro
Republic
Rego,
of
así
Colombia,
como
Mr.
de nuestro
Gustavo
ministro
Petro
de Trabajo,
Rego,
Antonio
as well
Sanguín.
as of Ministry of Work, Antonio
Colombia
Sanguin.
reconoce que la
Colombia acknowledges that
heterogeneidad productiva y la
heterogeneity
volátil de América
of
Latina también se
productivity that
refleja
characterizes Latin
en su
America, it's
propio
also
sector de
reflected in their own
Nuestro país
agricultural
coincide
sector.
en que
Our
enfrentar esta
country
complejidad
agrees
exige
that
políticas integrales que
facing these
respondan
complexity
a la
require
naturaleza del
policies
trabajo
that are
rural,
comprehensive, that respond
articulando
to the needs of
incentivos
the
para
rural
fortalecer la
areas,
productividad,
promoting
la tierra
incentives
como
to
tejido
increase
social y
productivity, to
robustecer
have
los
more social
sectores
protection, and
productivos.
strengthening these
Asimismo,
territorial works.
Colombia
Likewise,
respalda
Colombia
la
also
formalización
supports
laboral, la mejora no
labor
solo de la
formalization is
garantía de
improved by
condiciones de
income
trabajo
and
seguras y
guarantee of
saludables, que son
safe
elementos
and healthy
fundamentales
conditions
para
that
avanzar
are
hacia un
key
modelo de
elements in
desarrollo
order to
inclusivo y
move
sostenible
towards a
que
more
promueva
inclusive
el
and
trabajo decente,
sustainable
impulse
work
la
that promotes
competitividad del
decent work,
campo y
promotes
contribuya además
competitiveness of the
significativamente a la
farms, and
seguridad
also
alimentaria
contributes
de la región. El
significantly
informe
to food
Análisis de la
security in
OIT
the region.
advierte que
This
la agricultura en
analysis,
América
this
Latina ha
study
entrado
warns us
en
that the
una fase
agriculture in Latin America has entered a phase
desaceleración
of
estructural. La productividad
slowing
total de los
down the
factores que
pace
hacen
of the
menos la
productivity.
eficiencia
It's not
urbana
growing at the
y la
same
aparente productividad
pace,
laboral
efficiency, it's not
aumentan más por
increasing,
la reducción
and
del empleo que
labor
por las
productivity
soluciones
increases due
reales que
to
no están
production of
surgiendo.
employments, but not
A
because
ello
of
se suma
changes in the production.
la
And to
persistencia
that, we
de la
can add
informalidad de la tierra, la
persistence of
limitada capacidad
informality in the
institucional en los
land,
territorios y la
limited
falta de
capacity in the
innovación,
territories, and lack of
situación que deja a
innovation.
millones de
All of
pequeños
these
productores
situations leave
en una
a lot of
posición de
small, medium
vulnerabilidad.
producers in a
Estas
position of
son
vulnerability.
algunas de las conclusiones del estudio.
These are some of
En el
the
caso del
conclusions of this
panorama
study.
regional,
And with this
la
in
experiencia
front of us,
presente en
this in the
Colombia
region,
muestra una
the
trayectoria distinta.
experience of Colombia
El
show a
gobierno del cambio en cabeza
different
del señor presidente Gustavo Petro
pathway.
no solo
Mr. President Gustavo
reconoce
Petro
estos
not only
desafíos globales,
acknowledges these
sino que ha
structural
avanzado
challenges,
en
but also
intervenciones que actúan
has made some
precisamente
progress
sobre
in
las causas más
interventions,
profundas.
interventions
Desde agosto del
working on
2022
those deep causes.
se han
Since August
generado
2022,
1.59 millones
there
de
have been
hectáreas
1.59 million
y se han
hectares
asignado más de 580.000
managed
hectáreas
and
a
more
través del
than
Fondo de Tierras entre
580,000
2022
hectares
y
through the
2024,
land fund between
representando un cambio
2022 and
histórico en el sector
2024,
agrario,
causing
elemento
a
clave
historical
para la
change,
productividad,
key
la
element for
inversión y la seguridad
productivity,
en el campo
investment,
son medidas
and
que
security
empiezan a cerrar
in the
las
fields.
brechas que la
These are
región
measures that
desde hace
close
décadas
some gaps,
proponía.
gaps that the
El
region has had
protocolo de
for
la FAO
decades.
lo presentó
And just like the
en la
FAO
primera
team
parte de
presented
este
during that
evento.
first part of the
Allí
webinar,
ellos hacían énfasis
they
sobre uno
do
de los
an
programas
emphasis
del
on one of the
gobierno colombiano
programs of the
respecto de
Colombian
la
government
tierra y
that
las
works on the
características de
land and the
formalización de la tierra.
distribution of land
El
and
catastro
formalization of said
multipropósito y
land
estos
of the multipurpose
resultados hacen
cadastre.
parte de esa
And the
estrategia.
results are also
A ello
part
se
of the
suma una estrategia
strategy.
de inclusión
To
financiera
that, we can
que debe
add the
constituir uno de los
financial
pilares de los incentivos a
inclusion
la producción agrícola.
goal, which
Solo entre
uh,
2024 y
promotes
mayo del
agricultural
2025
production. Between
se han
2024 and
registrado
May 2025, we've had 875,000
876.544 operaciones de crédito
and several
para pequeños
credit
productores,
operations for the
impulsadas
small
por
producers,
por
promoted
iniciativas
by
como la
different
campaña Sembrando
initiatives such
Futuro,
as the
que
campaign
fortaleció la
Seeding
educación
Future,
financiera,
Sembrando
la
Futuro,
vinculación con
that
gremios y la
promoted
articulación
these
de redes
financial
supervisivas.
aid and
En lo
relationship
corrido
between
del 2025,
the
los
different
créditos
parties.
otorgados
In
alcanzaron
2025, the credits granted reached
2.29 billones de
2.29
pesos, ampliando la
billion
capacidad productiva de
pesos,
quienes históricamente han
broadening the
tenido
productive
menos acceso al
capacity of
capital.
those who've
De
had
manera
less access to the
complementaria,
capital.
el
In
asentamiento
addition,
agropecuario ha avanzado de
ensuring
forma decisiva.
agricultural
175.000
sector
pequeños
has
productores
increased.
asentados en el periodo del
175,000
año
producers
2024 a abril
on
del 2025,
2024 have had
con presencia en 29 departamentos
this
y
in the last year,
808 municipios,
and
casi la
and
totalidad
808
de los municipios,
municipalities
casi
have
el
received this
80%.
contribution.
Son
It's about
resultados que
80% of the
contrastan de
country.
manera evidente
These
con la realidad
results
latinoamericana descrita por el estudio,
highlight what
donde
was
la falta de
described in the
financiamiento y la
Latin
crisis
American
cambiaria
reality as the
siguen
study
frenando la productividad.
uh,
El estudio
describes,
acierta al visibilizar
increasing
las
productivity in
brechas de
Colombia.
género que persisten en el empleo
The gender
agropecuario,
gaps
donde las mujeres
persist in the
continúan
agricultural
concentradas en
sector, and
trabajos no
women are still
remunerados
focused
y
on
de menor autonomía
non-paid
económica,
works and less economy and autonomy in the economy, less access to opportunities to formalization of their jobs. This reality that we see in the entire region has also been a historical challenge. And however, the recent progress in the government of change of President Gustavo Petro showed the commitment to reverse these inequalities. Between January and October of this year, we've reached 37.59% of participation of women in the rural sector in the participation of credits granted, with several operations and a growth of 7% compared to last year, moving 2.13 million pesos of productive financing. In addition to this, we have the formalization of 1,683 land guaranteeing judicial or legal security, and the delivery of 2,500 hectares to each producers through the land fund. This shows that the country is moving towards this model where where women in the rural works can access assets, make financial and economic decisions, breaking the gaps that was characterizing the region. The challenge is up ahead. Colombia is taking some strong steps towards that so that we can make it something real and not just an idea. The productive results of the agricultural sectors are a key example of the government of change. While many regions are stagnant in their economy, and just like it was previously showed by FAO earlier, the participation of the GDP and the increase of GDP regional, Colombia registered between 2022 and 2024 a growth of 10% of the added value of agricultural sector, highlighting 2024 an increase in the sector of 8.1%, which is the highest of the entire year of all of the previous years. And it represents about 8.7% and 9.3% of the GDP. And the increase in 2024 increased the total GDP in about 6.4 percentage points, which shows that this sector is an engine in Colombia. We can also add the cultivate areas in the increase of production, in irrigation, health, visibility, and agricultural extensions, with several lands being part of it, with a strong presence and close to the territories, transforming lives and strengthening rural economies in the country. In rural aspects, it's as significant the results during our government. During the government of Gustavo Petro, the rate of occupations fell, rural occupation fell, and rural employment reached the highest point in 2 decades, different than the phenomenon described by ILO and FAO in the study where labor productivity increases due to the employment. In Colombia, productivity, employment, and rural income increases simultaneously, which shows that there is a productive change with a change in the paradigm. The study shows us that there is this regional systems with high efficiency and high vulnerability. Colombia goes in an alternative route, transforming the fields based on legal support, sustainable growth, and in rural estates. And it's in recent changes show that it's possible to increase productivity, employment, and territorial justice. We agree with the diagnosis of the study where the structure of the agricultural sector has been marked by a strong segmentation where millions of producers are working in a capacity of low capitalizations, high informality, and scarce access to land, credit, and rural services. These patterns in low scale and low productivity not only limits the growth of the sector, but also perpetuates the inequalities and exposes rural communities to the impact of climate change and volatility, the international volatility that we're seeing, which is why in Colombia, the government of President Petro assumed the task of transforming these conditions, strengthening the work, providing more access to the production, to the chain. The study also articulates with recommendation 207 of ILO with transition from informal to formal, and the resolution 2025 about means to address informality that strengthens social dialogue. As we mentioned here in it promotes an integrated approach of policies in productive development, social protection, and social and labor rights. Colombia has made progress, and it's has been built in participation with Colombia and the technical support of ILO. This strategy, built with ILO and with this new resolution, changes the way in which the state assumes the responsibility in the rural work. And not only labor conditions are in the center of the agenda, but also it incorporates AI and tripartite governance for the small producers that have been historically excluded.
In the framework of this strategy, as a concentration center, this shows our political involvement with labor laws. We don't only respond to the national requirements, but also we are a part of what the world and the country needs. And in 2066 of 2025, this is a labor reform that was promoted by President Petrov, was decisive in the agriculture of Colombia. Its Article 36 refers to generate a public policy in agriculture with the purpose of guaranteeing that all workers in this area have employment rights as established in the Constitution. And there is also a legislative immediate response of a project of law to create an agricultural contract. We had it in the reform, but the legislative rejected. We will continue on this path. This will be underway. This is underway with all the different players, from the small producers to the industry. With this, we will be able to overcome the informality and having a comprehensive system in agriculture, which is on the path of the recommendations that are set forth in this document. I support wholeheartedly the formalization of the agricultural sector that has been illustrated in this report. And finally, I would like to thank personally the willingness to share these thoughts for for involving us in this presentation and for the formalization of employment and decent work. Thank you very much, Mr. Garzón. I would like to invite Madame Caballeros, who represents the Ministry of Guatemala, the Executive Director of Guatemala, Madame Carla Caballeros, Chamber of Commerce. I would like to begin recognizing, first of all, that there is a joint collaboration of two United Nations offices like ILO and FAO, because one of the aspects we set forth is the coherence, not only of public policies that are promoted by the governments or administrations, but the policies and administrations that are promoted through different instruments in the United Nations context. So it's important to set this forth. However, I believe that it's important to refer to the report that is being launched today. And as it happens, and I'm sorry that I'm saying it so directly, all these agricultural areas that persist in the data and the reports and all the proposals, in fact, from FAO do not visibilize the commercial agriculture, which sustains and has a protagonistic role and adds value, and the contribution it does to economies of all countries. And it focuses enormously on the agriculture of subsistence and family agriculture of producers with very low productivity, with very low efficiency, and at a permanent standard of informality and lack of compliance with legal structures and employment laws. So it is important to recommend to ILO and FAO the next time that we want to talk about agriculture in Latin America, we visibilize in a better way the modern agriculture, the entrepreneurial agro, the industrial sector that contributes and is connected to various areas which are important to the economy, like energy, power, all the engines for the development of our nations in Latin America are promoting the industrialization of agriculture. This is very important because when there is a favorable business, when you integrate international markets into agriculture, we see that it doesn't only add value chains upwards, but it also produces a real income, higher income, and better employment condition in compliance with all the international standards. So it's things we believe that it is very important from the employment as an employment agency. It's important to set this, and I don't want to repeat the data. We were invited to set forth our ideas, but just going to the report itself, I would like to set forth 8 comments in particular. The first issue is that informality cannot be overcome without investment, without protection to private property. And I think this is very important because we see how agriculture, although it is a permanent activity in different countries in Latin America, many times it is threatened because there are no opportunities or enough investment in the rural area on behalf of the government itself, and some private investment is not allowed. So, from the entrepreneurial standpoint, when there's a level of informality, of course, this is a symptom of the lack of opportunities for investment and an insufficient business environment, and in some areas inexistent. We have seen countries that progress in formalizing this economic activity are those that promote investment and certain legal certainties that have real investment opportunities. Informality reduces where there is reduced when there's no technology, infrastructure, or factors that can improve productivity. There is a gap in talents. There's no irrigation. There's no automation or mechanism or mechanics, or there is no access to the markets because if there's a lack of routes or access or costs, lack of infrastructure investment, or because you have ports that are collapsed or they're insufficient, like is the case of Guatemala. But there is a constant harassment against entrepreneurship, as we have seen it in other countries like Guatemala and Colombia and Mexico. We have seen it in other Latin American countries where we have seen how the violent illegal blocks on behalf of groups that are on the sidelines of legalities, blocking highways and routes where producers transport food, where producers transport the essential input, not only affects the producer that is left with their entire production, harvest, eggs and milk, um, but also affects all the citizens who will not be able to have access to those products, which will not have access to supply. And they will therefore be left without food security and access to health, which in many cases depend on these products. The other, sorry, I also wanted to say the blockades and interventions. The owner of the property is harassed. There's no capacity of the state to protect the right of ownership of property or production. There are policies and recommendations that we have seen from other agencies in the UN. I was reading a report that was sent by CH, which is an organization of the OAS, It's not United Nations, but it's another multilateral organization. But we have also seen it from declarations of UN speakers to eliminate legal support that were designed by the authorities, to protect and guarantee protection to the right of ownership. But this is also being observed by some of these multilateral organizations. There's nothing worse to promote employment right, the productivity, decent employment, and the improvement of formality than to attack the rights to property. The second comment that I would like to set forth about this report is that to generate formal employment, we need stable, competitive, and predictive businesses. And this has to do with what I just mentioned. In general terms, the Latin America can absorb more formal employment if we're focused from a public policy standpoint to ensure a legal right to property, supporting productive processes. If we have public policies that allows for free competition, stabilization in regulations, governments that control and have more penalizations for companies, or that want to add more regulatory structure, particularly the small and medium size ones. These are governments that are not promoting formalization. If we avoid this bureaucracy that that goes against the construction of private highways, better infrastructure, if we promote the investment and modernization in ports, and we promote a strategy for the generation of energy, this kind of issue wouldn't be the kind of business that could reach the rural area. Sorry, there was a moment there where her voice was broken, so I did not know exactly what she said. So there would be better standards. It would go against one of the comments that I read in the Q&A of the participants. What happens in agro business, it's not only legal or fiscal, but there's also environmental aspects that improved in the compliance and the quality of employment, and the compliance also of labor contracts, both for producers and employees. Many of these studies by FAO, there is a precarity because you're not connected to formal employment, but formal employment, or world markets where it doesn't only refer to a decision of the entrepreneur that wants to be a part of a supply chain. If they don't comply with the requirements for an exporter of fruit, if they cannot, there will be no business, because the consumer and the buyer will also ensure that they oversee that they comply with all the legal regulations required for the supply chain. There is an application at the world level for employment, which are conceived in the ILO agreement, and it's part of the entrepreneurial companies and employers, and which we promote. The added value in industry are the best path for decent work. If we continue promoting in a romantic vision the agricultural industry with assistentialist program with vulnerable areas of this, we are leaving aside and perpetuating this poverty standpoint, which are consistently there and repeated within the subsistence agriculture. What needs to be done from the public policy and the entrepreneurial standpoint is to promote that primary production evolves, that the transformation of added value, certification achievements, innovation, and the development and certification of new products, which is only allowed through research and development and through access of biotechnology and the protection of soils and land. Employment with this kind of investment and with this kind of factors that increase productivity are employments which have added value. Just to summarize, added value is the entrepreneurial path for decent employment and formality. This number 5, this has to be done with companies and not against companies. We have models, theoretical models of what needs to be done, that which is fiscal or environmental, of what they would think that they should be doing as companies, involving players outside of the companies that have nothing to do with the company itself. It's important to promote dialogue with companies. It's important to have legal and regulatory certainty. And we also have to have we should not have arbitrary persecution of the government against companies. Oversight should be a process that will promote and train the producer so that the producer, him or herself, can have access to becoming a formal entrepreneur. It's cutting off again. I'm sorry. To ensure that they can comply with their employment contracts. I would like to set forth an example because I think it's very innovative. The case of Colombia. I'm going to compare it with Guatemala. SAC, the agricultural group of producers in Colombia, have set forth a very innovative requirement that nature is business model is very different to the nature of other economic activities. If we want formal employment, we cannot assign the same framework that you provide to other economic activities. SAC, this organization, set forth a very innovative idea of the real income of agriculturals, the recognition of small-scale and cooperative agricultural groups, self-employment, in fact, as different modalities of entrepreneurship in the agricultural environment, which should allow them to apply to different social security. I find it very innovative. Last time I saw it, it has not progressed. In the case of Guatemala, we see how permanently government wants to apply a minimum salary generalized by decree, which are not applied where more than 85% of rural workers are informal, and they're attacking companies that have formal employees when there is a minimum salary defined by decree, like some organizations that attack. In the case of Guatemala, payments of Social Security have become a disincentive because there's no presence of Social Security in the country. So a company has an incentive, they pay the worker a Social Security that doesn't exist and that is not available in that area. It's an additional cost both for the worker and the company. These are two simple examples, but I can give you fiscal examples also of one worker of the SAC oversight team. Companies hide and lie when we go to verify, we check, and some of the products are not available. And I'm asking, give me the exact example. They're talking about a storage of a small scale producer where the report had a certain amount of boxes of tomato boxes, but when they went to check whether they were there were no tomatoes. Out of the 100 boxes that supposedly should have existed, there was only one car. So the complaint of the worker is that they're lying to me. They don't have the inventories they're reporting. And my response said, because it's a good thing you don't have that amount. You would have a lot of rotten tomatoes. This is not to have the capacity to understand that obviously the inventories have to rotate if you want to produce and generate income, and that the inventories are inventories that have a life span. We need to understand the incentives in rural areas, but also the challenges. So the public policy goes hand in hand with these challenges. Policies should recognize how the agricultural sector is diverse and it has to be made competitive. It's not the same one that a worker or owner that is surviving, let's say, based on their land than a company. They require different types of gradual sustainable support. All these policies should go hand in hand with competitiveness, because without it, you cannot improve formal and decent employment. Informality is persistent. It's where the government is not involved. The levels of informality in Latin America is 40 to 60%, depending on the country. In the case of Guatemala, it's more than 70%, particularly in rural areas, even 80%. So we cannot talk about decent work if we do not have the basic conditions, infrastructure, roads, energy, water, connectivity, public services. But I'm sorry I'm insisting on these, but these are baseline requirements to provide conditions for formal employment. And number 8, agricultural companies in Latin America are already complying with best practices at the global level. Agricultural companies in Latin America, in addition to those in North America, are feeding the world. Oh, I'm sorry, she's breaking up again. They are complying with world standards. Sugar leading the second and third level of productivity. Then the palm oil are increasing the productivity in tons. They have the second level of productivity at the world level. I can give you various examples of productive areas in berries, mangoes, broccoli, which are the first world exports towards important markets such as the United States. I just want to conclude and thank you and emphasize that working in the conditions that promote the activity improvement of the entrepreneurial institution is linked directly to formal and decent work for workers in the field. Everything else, even though it sounds romantic, I know these are programs to protect the workers and farmers. They do not go beyond the discourse of a subsistence agriculture, which is not the agriculture that we should have and we should continue promoting in Latin America. There are major examples that are demonstrating that connection to the world, to the agro industry, are the responses for Latin America.
Por último, quisiera invitar al señor
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Ms. Caballeros. I would like to invite Mr. Bujías, Eduardo, Mr. Hill,
tiene la palabra.
Sí,
who
buenos
is the
días a
Secretary
todos y
General of
todas.
Convergencia
Bueno,
Sindical
en primer
Panamá. You have the
lugar,
floor.
saludar a
Good morning, everybody. I would like to say hi to the authorities of FAO and ILO, and also to reinforce the importance of this study that talks about these problems we are addressing. And I will get straight to the point that it's so interesting to me, which is the structural paradox. So basically, the information gathered in this study shows us very clearly that the discourse it's overcome by objective research. And this research shows that despite the fact that the country has had or the region has had an increase in productivity, at the same time, it has worsened the food sovereignty conditions. And this is very powerful. And why is that? Because beyond the fact that we want to continue promoting an intensive production, not considering the effects of climate change or environmental impact that agriculture has and the agricultural production has, there are criteria of inequality and what worth to have a high productivity of the production of sugar and the production of palm oil when we are affecting food security in the region. And this is something that affects the productive investment that for the productivity and it's not reaching the population because it is among these sectors where we find a lot of labor precariousness and not decent jobs that are basically deteriorating the conditions of lives of the workers and their families, as well as the community environment, social cohesion of the region. And at the same time, it's also generating an asymmetry between the investors of the capital and the communities that are located in the region and the environmental impact that they generate, because these are incentive activities that produce an environmental impact that's highly aggressive. On the other hand, it is very interesting within this approach that we are putting at the center of all of the research and all of the discussion on these public policies two key topics, which is generating decent work, which is promoted by ILO, and also security and sovereignty of food, which is proposed by FAO. The main concerns are on the people. And why is that? Because, of course, in the last decades, we've had an excessive concentration of the states of trying to solve the concerns of the capital. And what that has caused and has facilitated the conditions of the capital in the generation of the production or for exports. But what that has caused is an asymmetry that systematically affected the region. And so we need to change that approach. We need to try to find a way where we can find this reinforcement in this, or where these studies, this research allows us to improve the conditions of the people, whether that is through work that provides decent labor protections that provides labor, and at the same time for communities, the countries, and the region to have food sovereignty and security, which are some of our deficits that we are experiencing in the region. Now, on the other hand, I think it is also important to mention other things. It is important to know how we treat this. What's the level of demands that we give industrial production of food and generation of employment? We need to see here that these big productions create decent work or are causing or are affecting the exposure of these workers. And what we're seeing here, and I mentioned this in the study, the level of productivity that has been implemented is related to the incentive use of supplies, not only for technological application, but it's important to mention this because when we're talking about the supply, and when these supplies are related to the increase of products of their agrotoxical product, we are increasing productivity, but yes, we are also creating an impact that's highly negative and affects all of our ecosystems. So in that sense, it is important to check that if that is happening and understand what's the impact that this is having this type of production is having when talking about the environment. Now, on the other hand, the conditions of the works, the labor, what's a percentage that's kept in the worker side and in the generation of the production of all these entire value chain? Because for the case of Panama, there was an investigation, there was a study for a specific group, which is banana production. And in the analysis of that chain, we saw how in the area of production of banana, what the workers receive, it's a very small portion. It is not proportionate. There is an asymmetry in the entire value chain that is caused due to the production and the way it works in this sector. And if we do this in these different areas of the region, in different products and of the agriculture sector region, we're going to find the same thing with the palm oil, with coffee. And if we do this with different products that are representative of the region, we're going to find these asymmetries and with what the workers receive and what the capital receives. However, as it was already mentioned, most of the interventions are oriented towards to favor the intensive exploitation of this production. And in this case, policies need to be addressed to clear, specific regulations that guarantee the rights of workers and communities, because these are not only companies that need state support that it's strong in order to be developed, because sometimes it starts with big conglomerates of multinational companies that have capital invested. So the treatment for this type of production requires regulations that guarantee the compliance of labor rights, decent works, but also tax commitments, environmental commitments that need to be applied, and the state has to intervene strongly and robustly. Then we also have small, medium companies and agricultural subsistence economy or family agricultural economy, where it's also required to have a different type of treatment that has to do with how we promote the development of these activities so that these are more effective, and how the state contributes so that the sector for small medium companies and also family agriculture economies to have an increase in the productivity that improves the quality of life of the populations, including policies of environment care that is more amicable with their work. This is very important because this also allows us to differentiate what the study reflects regarding gender disparity. We are talking about a gender approach where most of the female workers that are immersed in the big agricultural plantations have conditions or their positions are precarious works are at theirs, and that is necessary to oversee and to prevent discrimination and violence as well as harassment in the labor world. Then in the other case, family economies, community economies, we find that these processes are led by women. And so the treatment that we give one to the other needs to incorporate the differentiation and the possibilities that the characteristics that each one has. Also, policies need to demand the compliance of labor regulations, social regulations, and to do so, we require the empowerment of workers, unions in these plantations, which is something that is not happening in most cases. Sometimes we face governments that try to limit the participation of unions and labor associations in these types of instances. The other thing is the treatment of the community organizations, rural unions, in order to create projects that will effectively allow for an improvement of the productivity, and so that that translates into a circular economy that's localized and that will allow for a comprehensive policy for differentiated treatment for the development of our region. And of course, for us, it is important to highlight the fact that the participation and the significance of the sectors in the creation of employment and how it is compared with the participation of the GDP and the contribution to the GDP. So it is important for us to bet for the development of this production, of this work on this agricultural side, and to understand this from this perspective, in which it is a bet to improve this development. And this needs to be tightly linked to environmental policies and with development policies that are required for the region. Lastly, it is also important to understand how we should do this not in an isolated manner by each nation, but we also require an interregional dialogue to be cohesive in the region so that we can have more chances to improve these economic blocks that are currently working in this world. And those are my thoughts on the study and on this debate caused by the study. I repeat, and I'd like to congratulate that this is very productive and useful to continue to talk about each one of the axes proposed by this study, because we are going to find a lot of data, a lot of information that has been controlling and dominating economic policies in the sector, agricultural sector in the region.
Muchas gracias, señor Gil. Ahora pasaremos a una breve sesión de preguntas y respuestas. A partir de las preguntas recibidas y dado el tiempo disponible, les planteamos una consulta general a todos los panelistas invitados. Y la pregunta es la siguiente: ¿qué intervenciones específicas serían importantes para asegurar que el trabajo decente alcance a todas las personas trabajadoras, ya sean las empresas agroexportadoras, donde en algunos países ha habido avances en la formalización, así como en la agricultura familiar? Y le invitamos entonces a compartir brevemente una perspectiva en no más de 2 minutos, por favor. Y para empezar, me gustaría ceder la palabra al señor Santiago Páez. Señor, tiene la palabra.
Ok, muchísimas gracias, ¿no? Primero felicitar a cada uno de los expositores. Yo creo que desde el ámbito ecuatoriano y desde el contexto ecuatoriano, lo que se está buscando es implementar normativa que pueda avalar justamente el trabajo formal, legal de nuestros agricultores familiares campesinos, ¿no? Es importante también reconocer que dentro de la tipología que establece los tipos de agricultores familiares que existen en el Ecuador, pues sí, yo creo que es la realidad de cada uno de los países de latinoamericanos. Nos encontramos que el 80% son agricultores familiares de subsistencia y que básicamente ellos son, hablando de ese grupo, el 90% tienen un trabajo informal. Desde el gobierno nacional y desde las políticas públicas que estamos implementando dentro del Ministerio de Agricultura, Ganadería y Pesca, lo que estamos estableciendo es un trabajo en crear normativa en conjunto a través de la participación ciudadana de grupos vulnerables, específicamente centrándonos en el tema de mujeres, para construir una normativa en conjunto, ¿no? Creemos que es un trabajo que tenemos deuda con el Ecuador, yo creo, y como mencionaban los expositores, yo creo que la justicia social no puede darse sin justamente el tema de la formalización, ¿no? Tomando en cuenta que básicamente el sector agropecuario en el país está aportando alrededor del 8% del Producto Interno Bruto, y alrededor de todo el sector agropecuario, este sector aporta con más o menos 2.100.000 empleos, ¿sí? De los cuales el 60% es de la agricultura familiar campesina y de los cuales la mayoría de ellos pues se encuentran en la informalidad, ¿no? Yo creo que este es un trabajo a mediano y largo plazo, que lo estamos y lo pusimos ya sobre la mesa como una política de Estado, pero donde buscamos también que se sumen todos los actores de la cadena, ¿no? El tema de la gobernanza yo creo que va a ser indispensablemente fundamental para poder lograr esto. Eso quiere decir poder incorporar a actores dentro de gobiernos municipales, gobiernos provinciales, gobiernos locales, gobiernos parroquiales, y entrelazar una estrategia conjunta. Yo creo que algo del informe que me llamó mucho la atención es justamente eso, ¿no? Es no trabajar de manera aislada como Ministerio de Agricultura, sino realmente es una necesidad de Estado que la
It
que
is a need
buscamos
of the
de
state.
mejorar esa realidad en el Ecuador.
That's what we need for Ecuador.
Muchísimas gracias. Ahora me gustaría pasarle la palabra al señor Garzón.
Thank you, Mr. Garzón.
Adelante.
You have the
Muchas
floor.
gracias. Yo diría dos cosas respecto a
I
la
would like
pregunta. Lo
to add
primero es
two
salir del
things about that
dogmatismo.
question. To leave
Aquí hemos
dogma
escuchado
behind,
algunas ideas
I
sobre,
heard a
digamos,
few
que se
ideas
llaman de
about
romanticismo, generar
that were talking about
condiciones
romanticism
de
and
equidad en el
creating
sector
conditions
agropecuario
of equity in
en la
the
exploración de la
agricultural
tierra
sector and
como
in
si
the
fueran, dijéramos,
lands
eh,
as
bizarras
if it was something bizarre
etcétera.
or
No.
strange or out
América
of date.
Latina en su totalidad requiere
Latin America
unas
in its
decisiones
entirety
estructurales
required structural decisions
relativas o encaminadas hacia
that need to
la reforma
be
agraria. Todos los países
focused
que han logrado
to
reforma
agricultural
agraria
reform. All of the countries that have had
han logrado ser
agricultural
potencias
reform
mundiales. Y
have
eso tiene que ver con
become
la titulación de la tierra
a,
y el reconocimiento
a
de los
big
pequeños productores.
country and a
Tienen que
power,
ver
a nation.
con trabajadores por cuenta
And it's
propia, tiene que
related
ver
to
con
having workers
asistencia social en términos
with
de
formality, social
apoyo técnico,
assistance, and technical support,
en la extensión rural, la formación
rural
para la
extension,
capacitación de los pequeños
the
productores,
training
de las
for
unidades
small
productivas.
producers
Y
or
lo digo
small
teniendo en cuenta algunas cifras, porque
productive units. And it's important to
mencionas
consider
estas ideas
some figures
que
because you're
hemos
saying that
transmitido
these
son
ideas
románticas,
we've shared are
pero no
romantic
hay cifras
ideas,
que sustenten el dogmatismo.
but
Por
there are
ejemplo,
no figures that
nosotros
sustain dogmatism.
tenemos
For
o hemos
example,
venido aumentando
we've
nuestras exportaciones.
increased our
Y esto
exports,
ha pasado
and
circunstancialmente
this
con el
has
apoyo
happened along
al
with
eslabón
the
más débil de la
support
cadena de la
to the
producción
weakest
agropecuaria,
link of
que
the
son los
agricultural
pequeños
production chain,
unidades
which
familiares
are the small
agropecuarias.
family units
Y eso tiene
working
que
in
ver
the
con
agricultural
la
sector.
formalización de
And
la
this
tierra,
is
con la
related to the
entrega de
formalization of the
tierras
land
a los pequeños
titles
productores
provided to
a
small
través de un
producers
proceso de
through
reforma agraria
a
que tenía
reform
nuestro
process,
presidente, en donde los
agricultural reform
agricultores
process
le han
that our
comprado
president
tierras
is
a
leading,
los grandes
where
terratenientes
they
para
have
poderla distribuir entre
purchased
pequeños
land
productores
to big
agropecuarios.
landowners to
Y
be
hemos logrado
distributed to
también
small farmers.
aumentar
We've also managed to
el
increase
porcentaje
the
del
percentage
territorio
of
con
the territory with
apoyo técnico, riego,
technical debate,
Decirles
irrigation,
con esto
and so
que
much more. And what I want to
Colombia
say with
puede
that
ser
is that
visto ahorita como
Colombia
un modelo
can be seen
de
as a
reforma agraria y
model of
modernización del sector
agricultural
agropecuario
reform and
para
modernization of the
democratizar el trabajo.
agricultural sector
Y,
for the
la
formalization of
segunda idea
works. And the
son
second idea
mecanismos
is that
legales que
to
permitan
have
la
these legal
formalización.
mechanisms that allow for
Uno de ellos,
formalization, one
el
of these
establecimiento
mechanism
de
is
los contratos
to
de burocracia
establish
del jornal agropecuario
agricultural
y
contracts
que
for
ese
the daily
contrato
workers,
agropecuario
and so that
esté
these
plenamente formalizado.
workers contract it's
Paradójicamente, Colombia, que
formalized.
es reconocido a nivel mundial
Paradoxically,
por la
Colombia is
producción de
acknowledged
café,
worldwide
en el estudio de la
for
OIT,
coffee
no los
production,
hallazgos
and
de la
the
investigación de la
ILO
OIT, cuando
study,
analizaban el sector
when they
agropecuario
were
en tres
analyzing the
cadenas
agricultural
centrales
sector in three
la del
chains,
café,
among
encontraron
them
que pese a
coffee,
que el
they
sector tiene
found that
que es el de
despite the
mayor
fact that the
dinamismo,
coffee
es el de
sector that
mayor,
has
de
a lot of
menos
dynamism
formalización.
is the one that
Lo que
has
quiero
the
decir es que no
less
las mejores
formalization,
condiciones
the
para los
least
empresarios
formalization, and the
son o
conditions for
significan
businessmen
directamente
or businesswomen
formalización laboral o dignificación del
require
trabajo o condiciones de trabajo
decent
dignas.
works
De
or
hecho, en
decent
Colombia,
labor
según el
conditions
estudio
and
de OIT,
formalization of works. And in
solamente el
Colombia, according to the ILO
3,6% de
study,
las
only
personas del sector
3.6%
cafeticultor están
of the people of
formalizadas.
the coffee
El
sector are
resto
formalized.
padecen de
The rest
informalidad, no tienen
are
cobertura
working in
social social, no
informality and
tienen
don't have
cobertura,
social
etcétera.
security
Entonces, esto
access,
nos
no
comienza a ser
coverage,
una evidencia
no
de
insurance,
que hay
etc.
que generar
And this is an evidence that
políticas
we
de
need to
apoyo
have policies of support
al eslabón más débil de la cadena
to the
agropecuaria.
weakest link of these production chains.
Gracias, señor Garzón. Ahora, para
Thank
terminar,
you,
me
Mr.
gustaría darle la
Garzón.
palabra al
Now, to
señor Gil,
conclude,
por
I would
favor.
like to give the
Adelante.
floor to Mr. Hill. Please, you have the floor. I think that, as it was mentioned, we would have to take two directions. For the case of intensive production in export, I think it is important to mention these aspects. We have banana, coffee. We have specific sectors where we have a participation in international markets, and we need to focus on checking the effects on value chain to guarantee that each one of the things that are included in the chain has guaranteed labor rights, because as it was mentioned just now, there is a high productivity, high participation of the market, and we see that there are informal workers, a lot of workers in precarious conditions that are part of this chain. So for these types of investment, we need to have a specific policy that allows for formalization of the entire chain so that this part of the production is distributed equitably and creates more formality. And on the other hand, in the case of economies, family economies, we have two paths. Right? We have the support that needs to come from the states and economic strategies to guarantee that the increase of the level of productivity improves better conditions of those better conditions of life, and that we can have a sustainable economy, a circular economy. And I think that this is a good opportunity. And at the same time, we need to check and review how the laws of social security allows us to include in a coordinated manner these sectors. Because of course, if we leave the responsibility of contribution of social security only on the units of family protections, it will be very difficult to incorporate that in this regime. So we need to find a way to facilitate the affiliation to social security with contribution of the state so that these families not only improve their productivity and performance and use of resources, but also so that they can have the possibility of being part of the regimes of social security in their respective units.
Muchísimas gracias. Ahora, para ir cerrando,
Thank you very much. To conclude, we would like to hear the specialists of the ILO and FAO that have been involved in the production of this report. Efrain, yes, thank you very much. It seems very interesting, the question that has been set forth. I would like to take advantage of the few minutes that are left, because for decent work to reach both the agro-export companies like family agriculture, we need to promote comprehensive value chain-based process that will improve formalizing the employment in rural areas. And we have seen that these strategies must be sustained in 4 areas of policies that are promoted. But this implies also a roadmap that will tackle the bottlenecks that limit productivity and decent employment. This is, we have a comprehensive view from that standpoint. So we need to move inclusive value chain to have producing companies or anchor companies with different economic groups, having the entrepreneurial association in models that are very interesting, which are a social and solidarity based organizations. In addition to strengthen the presence of organization, it is key to have entrepreneurial development, training, technical support, support for innovation adopted to rural areas, and the adaptation of digital technology that could accelerate the access to these services, particularly for small-scale farmers and companies that are already connected to formal markets. We have to guarantee social security systems that will provide employment incentives for training. This requires sustainable companies for investment in infrastructure, connectivity, rural services, mechanisms of interinstitutional mechanisms to get this organized, because these aspects are very complex, because we won't be able to close this gap between modern agriculture and family agriculture
Gracias,
if we do
Efraín.
not implement these areas. Efraín, Luis?
Gracias, Marco.
Thank you, Marco.
João, depois dessa intervenção de Efraim,
After
queda
these
muito pouco para dizer,
presentations
porque vou
by
invitar a meus
Efrain, there's
colegas a
very
pegar
little to say. I would like to
informe e
invite our
preço, sim,
colleagues to read the report
que desde FAO e desde a OIT,
from
vamos fazer
FAO
exposição
and
para fomentar
ILO.
esse
We're going
espaço, né?
to
Nós de sempre
continue
estamos
on
aqui
this
no
path.
Zoom,
There are more than
discutindo
100
de
people
forma
at
muito
this
aberta
Zoom discussing very
perfil, né,
openly
dos
and
desafios da
profoundly
formalização.
the challenges
Fica
of
aí também
employment
objetivo,
formalization.
desse, há que deixar de pensar na
We need to
formalização
stop
como
thinking about
impedimento, como
formalization
algo
as an
que
impediment,
complica a vida
as
das empresas,
as
sendo mais
something
bem
that
que uma estratégia
that
a la
complicates
vez que
a
garantiza
company's
direitos e
employment.
assegura
Once you
contribuição
are
muito potente
need,
da
right, you have a
dinamização
very
das economias de nossos
powerful
países.
dynamics of the
Porque essa
economics when
esse
you're involved.
câmbio
It's a
de
wealth, this
visão, né, Marco, que
change
desde a
of
FAO, desde
vision
a OIT,
is
nós vemos
something that from
trabalhando
FAO and ILO
nesse
we've
sentido
been
de
working
poner à
on from
disposição
the
das
standpoint of
ferramentas,
making
dos métodos,
available the tools and
contribuições
methods
de
and
nossas capacidades para
support
promover
of
isso a partir
our
do diálogo
knowledge to
entre os
promote this
distintos atores, né? Aí que
with
entendo
a
que esse
an open dialogue with the different
creio
players,
que
as
há
we did
uma
here.
grande oportunidade na
There
vida
is a
digital,
major
né? De
opportunity in the
estender a
digital world
tecnologia
to
digital como
extend
meio de inclusão
digital
produtiva e
technology as
formalização, que
a
é algo que também está
promoter
em,
of
em informes,
progress and advancement, which
sem
is
deixar
represented in the report
de
without
levar em
leaving
consideração a
and
diversidade
taking
que
consideration
caracteriza o
all
mundo
the
rural,
diversity that
assim que
characterizes
de nosso
the
lado muito
rural
atentos para
environment
seguir discutindo essa
of Latin
temática.
America and the Caribbean. I was delighted to hear
Muchas
all
gracias,
the
Luis.
inputs we
Y
had.
gracias
Thank you,
por
Luis.
las preguntas que
And
nos
thank you
han
all
hecho
for your
llegar.
questions
Lamentablemente
that you have
se nos
sent.
está acabando el tiempo y
Unfortunately,
debemos pasar al
we
siguiente
have run
evento.
out
De nuevo,
of
muchas
time. We
gracias
have
a
to
todas y a todos por
close this
participar
event.
en esta
Thank you all for
importante discusión. Como
participating in this
mencionado, el
important
informe en español
discussion.
y su resumen
The
ejecutivo en
report in
español
Spanish
e
and
inglés
its
ya se encuentran disponibles en la web
executive
de la OIT
summary in
y de la
English is
FAO.
already
Y
available on the
también les
webpage of
invitamos a
ILO
seguir
and
nuestras redes
FAO.
sociales en
I would like to
LatinAméricas y
invite
en
you
FAO
to
Américas para conocer
follow
más sobre este informe.
our
Gracias
social
de nuevo
network so that you
y
can have
feliz
more
tarde.
information about it. Thank you very much.